Well, I'm finally back, mostly, and I'm hoping to be back on my content schedule as I've finally gotten this last week, my last of my 4 kids back in school. And I promised you a video around what I did and what I believe can be helpful to work on healing from literally discovering or waking up, I was going to say, in a trauma trance where you think, how did I, a relatively intelligent human, end up in that life, in that story, in that situation? And I think it's really important to hold that it doesn't matter how intelligent we are or emotionally aware or thoughtful or insightful. I really do believe that what we're trying to do is heal, that we're wired to heal, and that our inner child, our story, our trauma is trying so hard to create and find a better, safer, more loving, whatever life. But we're operating with this like faulty system, not faulty in like that we're bad, but there hasn't been an update, right? It's like, this is what was installed 20, 30, 40 years ago. And even though we've tried to chip away at it, there needs to be an overhaul at times. And also, like, you can't believe that you're going to completely, heal from every trauma in your life and that's in the past. I really say this to a lot of my clients. It's a lot of things are management issues, right? You have to try to stay on top of them, and sometimes you will and sometimes you won't. So let's get into what I think has been helpful to understand in terms of that last video. So go check that video out if you haven't seen it. And it's going to be, more of my own personal story, but I want to try to do that more and more, even though it's really scary. So the first thing was, as I mentioned in that video, is I stayed a little girl. Now, I don't think you would have thought that in meeting me. I don't think come across as childish or infantilized or immature, but I didn't know that I was walking around as this traumatized little girl. And so if I could go back, let's say before I made a life partner choice and had 4 children, I would have wanted to be able to identify the little girl wounds. In other words, like, what was the thing I wanted most in my adult life? What was missing most in my childhood? And if I'd been able to really, I could have told you that, but if I'd understood it from the wound perspective, that basically it was like, what did you want that you never received, that you're almost willing to sacrifice everything for? Or that you want it so much that you have blind spots on about the reality of what it looks like. Because I wanted that to be taken care of, to be a stay-at-home mommy, to give my kids all this, I was talking about Martha Stewart, cozy life that I didn't have because I grew up in apartments with a single mom and chaotic parents, that it was like I was driven for that. And I wasn't seeing that in my focus to just heal that little girl. I wasn't letting the adult part of me evolve. I wasn't, not the adult in like the mature way, but I guess the glasses I were wearing were trauma glasses, and I wasn't making space for, what would my life look like as a mother who had trauma and all that, but who also had other parts of her life, who understood her wounds, things like that. Because the truth is that you are often wanting something so much that it puts you at risk for not seeing all the sacrifices it will take for you to get that. So the core of this one is understanding what is it that you most wanted that you did not get in childhood, and how might that impact the way you identify partners, the way you pursue your life, the things you say or do, the boundaries you set or hold, the education you seek, career, independence, autonomy, all of it. Number 2, I was unaware of my attachment pattern. And if I had gone, this is like, obviously, if I could go back and just redo it all, it doesn't mean I would have done anything differently. I could have done all the same things. But in theory, I can see hummingbird. Oh my God, it's so cute. In theory, sorry, distracted, I know. If I'd understood the core of disorganized attachment, meaning that for me and both of my parents, the source of safety was also the source of fear, and then how that would play out in me being, and then having a lot of loss, in me being very anxious and worried about people liking me back and it being my fault and blaming myself, but also that there would be a wall I could only go so far into in giving myself to somebody. And that really passed, I would say, my first love, where you're just like the purest love ever, where you haven't been hurt, that I would enact that wall. And that wall was there. And there was, at that point, I probably could have married anybody unless they had been very much we were both like in some therapy world together, I would have kept them at bay in some way, because it was so unsafe. Love was so unsafe to me. So I would have understood those patterns of anxiousness and avoidance, and theoretically I would have been able to work on identifying those patterns, challenging those behaviors, and looking at partner choice, for example. The next one is I didn't understand the role of anxiety and trauma in my body and how I would act that out and misinterpret it, right? So because I'd had a lot of loss, and as I got older, that, did happen more and more, I had this panic all of the time in my body that like everybody I love was going to be gone, like that at all times. And it manifested in like over control and just constant anxiety about things. And not understanding that, being a little girl at like literally 5 in the apartment complex at home while my mom was at work, like literally being a latchkey child at 5 in the parking lot at night, thinking she was never coming home, that years of that, alongside everything else, set me up to live in this state of panic that was not healthy for me or my partners or even my kids, right? It was so much anxiety. So I would have understood that trauma and how to work on it better through regulation techniques and skills and things like that. The next one is I stayed in the trauma bond with my mom and I kept her in it. So ideally, I would have been able to identify, even though this feels like normal, this isn't, and this is actually toxic and trauma. And that as much as you love her, you make exceptions and you let her get away with things that are absolutely not okay. But you're so used to blaming yourself, and this is the only way for you to have some kind of love, comes with this massive price of emotional and relational instability and harm on her part. And so my marriage didn't necessarily look like that. It was a different version of trauma. But in comparison, I thought, oh, my relationship is so much better than that. That's like identifiable chaos. This is like controlled. But it was narcissistic control. It was covert. It was, be perfect and don't question things and all of that. So if I'd understood the addictive nature of the trauma bond and my need for love, and I'd set more, identifiable boundaries with my mom and kept them, which I did do intermittently, but I never really meant it until I was 50. Like I reached my final breaking point and it was really too late. I had already endured so much trauma from her. So I would have understood trauma bonds and my role in breaking a trauma bond, because that's the issue. The next one is I would have understood my risk for choosing a narcissistic partner based on having emotionally chaotic parents. And what that looks like is that in comparison to parents, if the narcissist that you've chosen is not like this kind of behavior, where they're angry a lot, let's say they're not, they're more covert, especially, I would have understood that their appearance of like control and I've got it together and like arrogance and all of that would have felt peaceful and calm. It felt safe. It felt enveloping in comparison to, the high highs and low lows of parents who literally forced me to walk on eggshells because I just never knew what to expect. So if I'd understood that I was at risk for that, that would have helped. And of course, if I had learned to cultivate and listen to my internal world and intuition that was screaming at me, this isn't right, you should be really happy right now, why aren't you? Things like that. But I had learned to stay in relationships, I had to shut all of that down. So I would have learned the skills to do that. The next thing is, and the risk for choosing somebody who seemed different, but actually made me feel a lot of the same ways. The next thing is I would have looked at my pleasing and compulsive caretaking and how that served me to deny my own wounds and hurts, how being this great caretaker and, having it all like, oh, I'm going to read all the parenting books and do everything, blah, 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 and the sleep training, whatever the hell that was, that gave me a sense of identity that I am worthy, I am valuable. Look how good I am at being a mommy, or what a good homemaker I can be, whatever. It's like those things are important, but I was using them to fill up this other part where here I am, I have a master's degree, a doctorate, like which I never thought I would get, and whatever. The point is there were parts of Kim that were not content. And I'd already got my master's degree by that point in MFT and being a therapist. So like the therapist part of me would show up in the parenting part, but like the rest of her that like love relationships and thinking about things, and I just like shut that down. So I put everything in the bucket of let me be of service to everybody else and take care of everybody else. And that allowed those in my life to benefit. It allowed them to not show up for me or the kids because I didn't trust anybody, or I had it all figured out, or don't worry, I've got this, I can handle anything. And it ended up being a lot of loneliness and a lack of self, a development of self. The next thing is I didn't deal with the abandonment issues around my father. And even though I went to therapy, and that is actually what got me to change careers after I had been in PR, my first job out of college, went to therapy and decided, like, I think I want to be a therapist. And even though I went because of my father, the way I lost him, at that point I had no idea he wasn't not my biological father. Like, I didn't know any of the things I know now. But I don't think I really, like, I started to work on that, but I don't think I fully understood that longing to be seen and blaming myself, which I did do in the beginning, was still deeply rooted in, like, who I thought I was. The next one is I lost my identity and my power in my relationship, and I gave all that up, like I was just saying earlier. And so in my quest to be taken care of, I sacrificed and willingly gave up parts of myself that I really would have liked to have cultivated and needed. So you'd want to work on, who am I and what are my boundaries, and where do I have power? Where do I want to collaborate? Things like that. Not just surrender in the service of being taken care of, because when you've never been emotionally cared for, let alone physically, financially, that's the thing you want the most, is you just want to finally be in a safe nest with somebody. And I think that is the whole point of this video, is that is important, but it cannot be the only thing. The next one is I kept being good and appropriate. So I was terrified of anger and throwing a fit. Are you okay, Cup? Sorry, my senior dog is having a moment. Are you okay? Okay, you're okay. Okay. Are you okay? Okay. Is that basically it was like I didn't ever want to be my parents who raged and yelled and screamed. So I didn't want to do that. But so I would stuff my angry feelings in. I would, they'd go down over here and pop up over there probably. And they came out in ways that weren't really good. And so I didn't think I was allowed to be angry, because anger equaled danger to me. Conflict equaled anger equaled danger. And so I let that person get away with way more than I should have, until I didn't anymore at the end. So then I held in resentments. When I would get angry, I would cry. Like, it's crazy to me now, because it is not, when I get pissed, like, I'm pissed. I do not cry anymore. But just the sheer act of being angry was scary and terrifying, and it made me sad. And that shows you how I was not comfortable in my own anger, that anger is a normal, healthy emotion. It's just what you do with it that matters. And so to me, all of that was just like buried in resentment, and I think came out in my body, and fatigue, and just sadness and anger and all of that. So I would have understood that more, and advocated more, and expressed myself more, and felt entitled to my anger. Like, no, this is not okay what you're doing. I took too much, didn't set enough boundaries. So I would have been, even though I knew this word boundaries, I had a master's degree in psychology and therapy, I justified the pushing of boundaries all of the time, because that was what I was raised to do. There were no boundaries in my childhood around so many things. Who takes care of adult responsibilities, how adults treat children, how adults talk to children, how adults manage their feelings, like I'm saying. Like, I didn't understand that. And so I thought, well, it doesn't look like that crazy chaos. And so I just took too much, and I would always find a way. Oh, he works hard. Oh, he makes a lot of money. Everybody I know who makes a lot of money works a lot. Like I said in another video, yeah, but my friends whose husbands were making even more, this is like the height of the .com, we're still home more. We're still more invested. So like, but I didn't know that. So it's like, back to that whole thing. Didn't know how to do that. I confused control and trying to manage things with my anxiety with safety. So if I covered all the bases, if I made sure the kids had this thing or that thing, that everything would be fine. If I called when he got on the plane and when he landed, if I prayed a lot, like whatever it was, everything was about, if I can control it, I'll be okay. And control, I should say, control is an illusion. I stayed naive and wouldn't let myself see things, as I've talked about. I do think that's part of the way my brain works, that I would have these like inklings, but I would never let myself follow them. And now I would be like, let me see your phone, if I was truly in a place like that. But back then I was like, I need to respect boundaries, and everyone needs autonomy, which I do believe that. Even with my kids, I really haven't, I'm not a perfect parent by any means, but like I I've always wanted them to have a sense of autonomy in themselves. But sometimes I think I went too far with that. I maybe should have, at least in my relationship, checked up more. So I stayed in a very naive place, as I've talked about, because I also don't think I wanted to see it. It would have been too dangerous. Here's the last few things I did. I let myself be done. When I finally was done, I gave myself permission to say, I am jumping off this cliff with 4 babies from the age of 1 to 9. And I haven't worked in 12 years, and I have no freaking idea what I'm going to do. But I can't do this anymore. And that began to build an internal sense of self, but came with a lot of obviously painful risks and trauma and difficulty. I wish I hadn't gotten to this place that way, but that was the only way for me to get here. I took risks, I moved, I made changes, I let myself be humiliated by going to court and fighting for my kids. It was horrific, the family law system. I put myself in the way of situations that I knew I had to fight, and I would be on my knees literally before a mediation or going into something, because there was a lot of conflict, and it was about safety for my kids more often than anything else. I began to go back to school and build a career, and that was monumental. And I'd love to share it here, but one of the things I did is I didn't think I could be a therapist anymore, because I was like, this divorce has wrecked me. And I actually went to a summer program at USC and made a short film. It's actually on IMDb, and I made this film, and it was an 8-week film program. It was amazing. Went to some of the people in my courses were super cool. They were celebrity kids. I was like the oldest person there. I was in my 40s. But it brought me so much joy and tapped into my sense of self again, because I love telling stories, and I realized I was too old to go back and do that, even though I love the idea of working in the storytelling world in terms of film and stuff. I was too old. My kids were too young, but it got me excited to go back and get my doctorate, and that's how I do that. So building a career and identity did a tremendous amount, especially becoming financially autonomous not that many years ago. More and more, and that growing, that has done so much for me to think that I could take care of myself. I would have said I can take care of myself, but deep inside I think I was terrified. Could I actually do it? And I'm still terrified of losing things every day, and I'm still one person. I have no inheritance, no family like everybody else. Not everybody else. I know I have many blessings, but my point is that I don't have a backup. There is no one else. And so it has done a lot for my sense of self. I trusted my gut when I used to ignore it. I would push back. I would say, F you sometimes. I worked on my anxiety, my perfectionism. I learned DBT skills, mindfulness. I started doing exercises and for my anxiety, which I don't do perfectly, but I learned the skills. I ended relationships that weren't serving me, and I faced the trauma of my childhood. I kept no contact with my mom. I stopped being afraid to say no. I learned how to dialogue with myself around self-compassion. It's okay, Kim. I literally say God, you're being so hard on yourself. It's okay you make mistakes. It's okay you feel embarrassed. I learned to cultivate that inner parent voice that I can't always do perfectly, but I know how to get there now. And I let myself be vulnerable here, honestly. I had never shared really anything until I started doing social media. And it's still been a journey, as many of you know who've been here with me. But many of you say the more you are you, the more we relate to that. And that's terrifying. Whenever I think, oh my God, I can't post that video. Oh my God, I should delete it on TikTok or here. Those are almost always the videos that you guys resonate with the most, or you all resonate with the most. And I'm letting myself do it, and it's freaking terrifying. I have so much more I want to share, but I also want to be professional, and so it's hard. But the bottom line is, I let myself show up in a way that is still hard to say. You are getting older. You're not perfect. You don't have it all figured out. But your humanity, your vulnerability, your trauma, and all the horrible things that have happened to you actually are the things that give me the most connection to all of you. And you let that happen with me too. And I appreciate that so much. And lastly, I know there will always be work to do until the day I die. And I'm okay with that. So anyway, I have a client now. I gotta go, but I want to say thank you so much for being here. I love you all so much. I really, really do. And I've missed being here more consistently, and I'm still formulating my techniques in terms of strategies of what to post where, but I hope to be back on my game here more and more. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you so much. Have a good day and stay safe. Take care. Bye.